Hi, my name is J.A. Valeur with Eventyr Games, and in this video I want to talk about Chapter 1, Witchlight Carnival, in the new adventure The Wild Beyond the Witchlight. This video is a companion piece to our DM's resources on running The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and some of the stuff we'll be going over here is also in the DM's resources. That does also contain extra maps, encounter sheets, cheat sheets, more magic items, other new stuff. So if you want to check out the DM's resources for The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, you can do so in a link somewhere down below. And now with that out of the way, let's get into the video and take a look at Chapter 1, Witchlight Carnival. Alright, so first off I have to say that I think Chapter 1, Witchlight Carnival is a very fun chapter. It has a whole bunch of locations and each of them have something unique going on and are very interesting and will be a lot of fun for your players. That being said, the hugeness of this chapter, the amount of content you get within, is also what makes it difficult. Because it is a difficult chapter. There's a lot of different locations that the characters can basically go to whenever they want, which means that the DM needs to have them all prepared as they start the session. In addition, it's also not really clear what exactly is going on at the carnival or what should be going on, and the structure of the chapter isn't very well described. It's sort of hidden away throughout the carnival, throughout the chapter, so the DM has to read through everything to really get a good understanding, and even so it can be difficult to piece together what the characters are actually supposed to do and how you get them to do that. So that's what we'll be going over in this video, where we'll first give an overview of the chapter, then discuss the heist that may be a part of the chapter, and also provide a sample structure or some guidelines that you can follow, and do some troubleshooting for various events and locations that may cause problems or that you may want to change to improve them or make them more fun. Alright, so to kick this off, let's begin with an overview of the chapter. This is something the chapter isn't very good at. There's not really an overview of what's going to happen. There's just a bunch of locations, some timed events, and some other scenes that can happen, and then it's up to the DM to scramble and put everything together. So to quickly summarize, the point of the Witchlight Carnival is that the characters have to find a Feywild crossing. This Feywild crossing is in the Hall of Illusions, and Mr. Witch and Mr. Light know the incantation that can activate the portal so they can cross through. There's also an NPC called Tumblestrom who can help the characters and who also knows this incantation if the DM decides that it's necessary for the characters to get some extra help. In any event, the characters realize that they need this information, but Mr. Witch and Mr. Light aren't forthcoming. So after speaking with Burley, a bugbear that guards the staff area, or Kettlesteam, a troublesome Kenku warlock who is going around the carnival creating trouble, the characters are told that they need to steal something, either the Witchlight Watch or Witchlight Vane, from Mr. Witch and Mr. Light, and then they can use this item to blackmail the carnival owners to help them get through the Fey crossing. So if you're following me here, the point is the characters learn they need information from Mr. Witch and Mr. Light. They then run into Burley or Kettlesteam and discover that they can steal something from the carnival owners to blackmail them to get them to open the Fey crossing in the Hall of Illusions. So that's the overall summary. There's essentially three ways that this can happen. The first is that the characters are summoned to a meeting with Mr. Witch and Mr. Light after either changing the mood of the carnival to being extremely bad or extremely good, or because they give a good performance during the Big Top extravaganza. They could also have snuck into the staff area and been discovered or chosen to confront Mr. Witch and Mr. Light. In any event, the characters have this meeting with Mr. Witch and Mr. Light where they won't get any information. The two carnival owners aren't eager to help them, but on their way out from the meeting, the bugbear Burley pulls them aside, explains that the carnival owners have been acting weird and that it needs their help, and suggests that the characters steal the Witchlight Watch. When the characters do so, they can use the watch to blackmail the carnival owners and get through the Feywild crossing. The other solution is that the characters become aware of Kettlesteam, either by listening at the staff area to Mr. Witch and Mr. Light discussing her, or by talking with various NPCs, or because they see the Kenku causing trouble at some of the locations in the carnival. The characters can then chase down the Kenku, and if they capture her, they can talk with her, where she can explain that she's a warlock who's looking for information on what's happened to Sibylna. She has basically the same plan as Burley: steal something from the carnival owners, blackmail them, and get them to open the Fey crossing. So we have more or less the same plan, but it's given in a different way. Lastly, there's also the backup plan, as I like to call it, where Tumblestrom, this planeswalker who's mysteriously interested in the characters, decide that enough is enough, the characters can't figure it out on their own, and she springs forth, shows them where the Feywild Crossing is, and says the incantation that gets them there. This is really a backup plan. It's something you should only use if you have to, because it sort of robs the players of any sort of sense of achievement they would otherwise have. So another issue with these plans, aside from being hidden throughout the chapter instead of being summarized neatly at the top, is that it can be difficult for the players to realize what they have to do or follow the plans even if they know what they're supposed to do. If they have the Lost Things hook, they may not realize that they need to find a Feywild Crossing or why that's important. They may not care too much about anything else. And this can make it important for you to have NPCs they talk to say that if someone knows where the thing you have lost is, it would be Mr. Witch and Mr. Light, or maybe even suggest that whatever they've lost could have gone through a Feywild Crossing or could have passed on to the Feywild. Characters have the Warlock's Quest hook. They would already know that they're looking for the Feywild Crossing, which makes some of the things more easy, but there's also a lot of the NPCs that only mention lost things and only care about lost things, which the characters may not care about if they're just looking for a Feywild Crossing. So here the opposite is the case. You should have NPCs the characters talk to insinuate or respond that if there is a Feywild Crossing at the carnival, Mr. Witch and Mr. Light would know where and how to use it. So the characters know that, okay, we have to speak with Mr. Witch and Mr. Light to get access to the Feywild Crossing. The way you give the NPCs this information is simply take the NPCs that already are supposed to give the characters information, just have them also give these pieces of information, either that Mr. Witch and Mr. Light knows about lost stuff, or they know about the Feywild Crossing. Okay, so once the characters have either gotten the plan from Burley or from Kettlesteam, they will need to perform this heist to actually steal something from Mr. Witch or Mr. Light. First off, there's a big error in how the plan is presented by Burley, who says that the best time to do this would be during the Big Top Extravaganza. Now there's various reasons why this I think is an error, and the first one is that later down in the same section under Burley's plan, we're actually told that we should see crowning the Witchlight Monarch for more information. It's also fairly likely that the Big Top Extravaganza will have already happened, as the characters are summoned to the meeting with Mr. Witch and Mr. Light after the Big Top Extravaganza if they perform there. Anyway, this seems to be an error, and it seems that the heist is meant to happen during the crowning of the Witchlight Monarch, which is also where we are specifically told where both Mr. Witch and Mr. Light are, and which of the NPCs, including NPCs that could be allied to the characters. So here my advice is ignore what's in the text, have Burley or Kettlesteam, whoever proposes the plan to the characters, heavily suggest that the heist takes place during the crowning of the Witchlight Monarch. As for how the actual heist runs, that is in large part up to the players, but the text does let you know that the characters can acquire allies, such as the Displacer Beast at Lost Property, or the Mute Mime if they get back his voice, or the Merfolk over at the Silver Song Lake. It'll be something like that. These NPCs can help the characters during the coronation by either distracting Mr. Witch and Mr. Light, or even in the case of Candlefoot, this mime, steal the actual watch from Mr. Witch, as he has a quite high sleight of hand score. Now, however this unfolds is entirely up to the players, so the idea here is simply that you run with it and make it plausible or very likely that they will succeed, because that is of course the most fun way to end the chapter. So something the book doesn't really get into is how Mr. Witch and Mr. Light react to the theft. It just says that if the watch is stolen, they will simply decide not to cause a scene and give in to the character's demands. Now I think this makes sense if the characters manage to steal something and then hide it away, then confront Mr. Witch and Mr. Light maybe in their wagon later, after having already hidden away the item, or at least not having it right in the hand where Mr. Witch and Mr. Light could just take it back from them very easily. It also seems slightly implausible that the characters could simply take Mr. Light's Witchlight Vein out of his hand and then make their demands, and Mr. Light wouldn't try to take it back, he would just give in to the demands simply because they have it in their hand. Alright, then I also want to take a look at some of the issues or things that can be improved within the carnival. This is something that we go into great detail with in the DM's resources for the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, so these are just the highlights or some of the most important things that I would make sure to change when I'm running Witchlight Carnival. So the first thing is that we have this Fey Pact at the ticket booth, where this goblin, Nicholas Midnight, could, instead of receiving payment, make a Fey Pact with the characters. These pacts are very fun, small things the characters can roleplay or the players can roleplay, and I think it's a shame not to have them included. But as written, the characters would have free tickets upon arrival, and additional tickets are only 8 silver pieces, so it's not very likely that the characters would need to barter with Nicholas Midnight. So to make it more likely that these fate pacts come into play, you could decide that they don't have free tickets and have Nicholas Midnight suggest the fate pact immediately, such as saying tickets are 8 silver pieces, but if you want to, we can also come to another arrangement and then explain how the fate pact works. Next up, we have the Hall of Illusions, which of course plays a pivotal role in the book or in the chapter because it's where the Fey Crossing is. It's also the location where we get into 2 different failed marriage proposals. First, there's the mime and the merfolk, where the mime lost his voice during a proposal which angered the merfolk, and now they are both sad and apart, and the characters can help get back the mime's voice, or at least patch things up to get them as allies during the heist at the coronation. So that's one subplot we have here that involves a marriage proposal. Then there's also a plot where the characters, as they arrive at the Hall of Illusions, see 2 halflings. One halfling proposes to the other, but the one that is being proposed to suddenly bursts into a fit of laughter, and the proposing halfling becomes upset, runs into the Hall of Illusions, and is almost whisked away to the Feywild if the characters don't intervene. So in essence, we have 2 failed marriage proposals going on, or at least being discussed within very, very short time of each other, and I think this is just a bit weird. It will seem a bit odd to the characters or the players. It seems like it's just 2 similar things, it's too coincidental. This is an easy fix, of course. You can simply decide that the mime just lost its voice, and the merfolk thinks it's because it won't speak to her, and now she's very upset, and there's no marriage proposal in there, it's simply a relationship issue. Next up, we have the mystery mine, where the characters will be confronted with their own fear, and if they fail a lot of wisdom saving throws, they may end up with some very long-term nightmares that can ruin their sleep for up to 8 days. Now, this ruined sleep also comes with 1d3 levels of exhaustion, which is just frankly a lot. And the issue I have with this is that while it's not very likely that the characters will get these nightmares, they have to fail 3 checks, which is hopefully not very likely. But if they do get the nightmares, these nightmares could potentially run for 8 days, which could be as long as the campaign is. If you're reading through the book, it's not exactly a campaign that takes 3 in-game months to complete. It could take just a week or 2, and then 8 days is a significant chunk of the adventure. In addition, it could also be lethal, because just a few bad rolls means that you've gotten 6 levels of exhaustion, which of course means that the character dies. So the fix that I propose here is simply that you reduce the amount of time the nightmares go on, so that could be down to 3 days, for example, and instead of gaining up to 3 levels of exhaustion with every failure, the character just gain 1 level of exhaustion, and if they succeed, they get to remove a level of exhaustion, as you normally would be able to after a long rest. This way, the curse or the nightmares don't last for the entire campaign, and they won't be lethal to the characters. Lastly, we also have the staff area, which of course can be very important, and most notably here is of course Burley's divulgement of the plan, how the characters can acquire the Witchlight Watch and convince Mr. Witch and Mr. Light to show them Feywild Crossing. There's also the possibilities that the characters react poorly as they're with Mr. Witch and Mr. Light, or they're just caught sneaking around the staff area. Here you could decide that instead of throwing them out, Mr. Burley simply tells them his plan and takes them aside. He can see that they're resourceful, they're also looking for something, and thinks that they may be able to help him. That also leads to the last point of this troubleshooting, which is thieving and fighting. Now, the book says that if you steal something or you fight, you're thrown out of the carnival, and then it doesn't say much more. Another place in the chapter we learn that characters that are evicted from the carnival can either sneak back in or barter their way in, and this would presumably be with a fate pact with Nicholas Midnight. Now, I think there's some other possibilities you can use here if the characters don't realize that they can sneak in or barter their way back in, or they don't know if they want to. What you can do is, if the characters are called thieving, you could decide that they are simply forced into some sort of punishment or pact. That could be, as we've described in our DM's resources, a magical hat that jingles so that everyone will know when they're coming. They can't sneak around, they can't pick pockets because they're constantly drawing attention to themselves. There's also the possibility that you simply use their eviction from the carnival as a catalyst for either Burley or Kettle's team divulging their plans to the characters. So if the characters are caught fighting somewhere or sneaking into the staff area, as we just discussed, this is where Burley could come forth and tell the characters his plans. Or if the characters are thrown out of the carnival, Kettlesteam could come up to them, noting that they're also looking around for something perhaps. Alright, so last up I want to go over how I would prepare for running the Witchlight Carnival. The first thing you need to prepare, of course, is the entrance where the characters get their tickets and they get a map from Nicholas Midnight. As the characters walk into the carnival, you can give a description of the big top and the bubble pot and also the Calliope or Calliope, whatever you call it, where the monkey is playing music. And these are small locations that don't really have ties to the plot, at least not yet, so the characters will have a soft landing in the carnival, get to experience some light fun before they start delving deeper into the plot. As soon as they've tried one location, or if they're unsure what they want to do, you can have the Hour 1 event run, which is this welcome gift event where the characters can get some gifts. After that, they have some free roaming around where they get to pick out locations where they want to go. And here we simply make sure that we have read through all the locations, of course, and also that we remember to describe perhaps one carnival scene, a small stall, which aren't really on the map, at least not named on the map, as the characters move from location to location. So if they're going from A to B, you want to let them know about each named location that are on the way, just quickly describing. Then you walk past this, and perhaps also describe to them a single carnival scene from the table that is in the book. So you sort of bring the carnival to life. And if they're walking past some of these small stalls on the map, you can also describe perhaps one or two competitions or food stalls that you think would be interesting. Alright, so once the characters have visited a few locations, or they kind of get bored perhaps, you can run the Hour 4 Big Top Extravaganza, which of course is shouted out at the street by criers who say it's time for the Big Top Extravaganza and so on. Assuming that the characters participate in the Big Top Extravaganza, you should also have the NPCs here, that's Mr. Light for example, urge the characters to take the stage, because that makes it more likely that they will get to meet with Mr. Witch and Mr. Light. Somewhere around the middle is also where we want to have this meeting with Mr. Witch and Mr. Light, either because the characters perform well at the Big Top Extravaganza, or because they have changed the mood of the carnival, or because they snuck into the staff area and were discovered or confronted Mr. Witch and Mr. Light. Of course, if the characters have already run into Kettlesteam, for example, and confronted her, you will not need to run the meeting with Mr. Witch and Mr. Light. In fact, it may cause more confusion, because the characters perhaps thinks that this is the time to try and steal from Mr. Witch and Mr. Light, or if they get the quest from Burley as well after meeting Mr. Witch and Mr. Light, it can become slightly more confusing than it needs to be. So yeah, assuming the characters haven't talked with Kettlesteam, they have this meeting with Mr. Witch and Mr. Light, they don't learn a whole lot, and then afterwards they're taken aside by Burley, who explains his plan and sets them onto this heist, of course suggesting that they do so during the coronation later on in the evening. Before that, they can either enjoy themselves in the carnival as they would, or they can try and speak to some potential allies, such as the Displacer Beast at Lost Property, or Candlefoot, this mute mime, or the merfolk over at the lake. Whichever way they do it, they can just roam around freely now for a few hours before you then run the Hour 8 event, the crowning of the Witchlight Monarch. The book has a quite neat description of how the crowning unfolds, so you can simply just adhere to that, and if the characters have some allies, these can of course help. This could be the Displacer Beast distracting Mr. Witch as they are on the sidelines watching the coronation, or it could be Candlefoot simply stealing this watch from Mr. Witch while the characters distract him, or the merfolk distracts him with a song, or Burley distracts him as he's escorting him to and from the big top. After having acquired the watch, the characters can then confront Mr. Witch and Mr. Light, and everything unfolds as it is described at the bottom of the chapter. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is the structure that I would try to have in mind when running the chapter, and of course, this structure may not be followed. Your players, as players will do, may do something crazy, and that's also okay. The point here is just that we can relax a bit and we can be more ready to improvise and adapt if we know that there is a plan for when things stall or they go bad. If you'd like a neat write-up of all the stuff here, as well as some maps and counter sheets and other helpful stuff, I suggest that you check out the DM's resources for The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and again, there is a link somewhere down below. You can also support us on patreon.com/Eventyr, where we put out weekly 5e content and also polls on videos and articles. Of course, there's also always the option to like and subscribe, which is entirely free and something that I hope that you will do if you like the content. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot left to say except thank you for following along, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.